Hello and welcome to the Inside Intelligence webinar series brought to you by the Master of Science in Intelligence Analysis and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion with Barbara Alexander on open source intelligence. My name is Peter Huggins and I'm the event producer. Please note today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the Inside Intelligence playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we'll answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the event to our moderator, Dr. Michael Ard, Program Director and Senior Lecturer for the Master of Science in Intelligence Analysis program.
Thank you very much, Peter. Welcome everybody to Inside Intelligence. We're very happy to have with us Barbara Alexander, who is the inaugural president of the OSINT Foundation, a professional association for open source intelligence practitioners. She is a career intelligence officer in the federal government and retired member of the Senior Executive Service, and has a broad background in analysis, collection, strategic planning, information technology, and intelligence community issues in general. Mrs. Alexander began her career as a European military political analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency and held senior management positions at DIA, including Deputy for Counterproliferation, Staff Director for Russia, Eurasia, and Africa, and Chief of the Relationship and Performance Management Group in the Office of the Chief Information Officer. She joined DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis in 2008 as the director of their Collection and Requirements Division, where she oversaw the department's OSINT exploitation activities. In 2010, she became director of INA's Cyber Infrastructure and Science Division and directed intelligence analysis on threats to the nation's cyber networks, including our critical infrastructure sectors. Upon her retirement from federal service, she served as an industry expert for intelligence and homeland security, most recently at General Dynamics. She is a Bachelor of Arts degree holder from Wheaton College in political science and a Master's of Arts degree in international relations from SAIS at Johns Hopkins, and a Master of Science degree in national security strategy from the National War College. She's also a project management professional. Thank you for being with us, Barbara Alexander.
Great. Thank you so very much, Michael. It's a delight to be part of your series. And since my time at ICE was foundational there, and I'm a proud alumna. I also want to have kudos expressed to Johns Hopkins Geospatial program, which has been a major contributor to the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency's Tearline program. And Tearline was given the OSINT Foundation's Unit of the Year Award this year as part of our first set of awards for excellence across the OSINT community. I was asked to talk about maturing OSINT, which might seem to be a strange topic since open source information, or what we more commonly now call publicly available information, has been around at least as long as the printing press. During the Revolutionary War, the British complained that colonial news sources were identifying their movements, and commanders in the Civil War lamented the type and volume of military information that was available, particularly in the northern newspapers. So today we only have to see how OSINT is being used in the war in Ukraine, disaster relief, the posts on social media, to recognize that open source is critically important in all manner of global issues. But OSINT has a checkered past within the intelligence community, the IC. We date the official start of OSINT in the United States from February 1941, when the Federal Communication Commission's Federal Broadcast Monitoring Service, which was later renamed the Federal Broadcast Information Service, called the Federal Broadcast Intelligence Service, but it's this, was established. And the IC has not generally embraced OSINT as an intelligence discipline on a par with signals, geospatial, measurement and signatures, or human intelligence, the SIGINT, GeoInt, MASINT, or human disciplines. When I started as a young analyst a very long time ago, I used OSINT primarily to provide context for my classified products. Now, 30 years later, it's amazing. There's still a bias in the intelligence community toward classified information. And there's wide variance in how open source information is gathered and used in the IC. We have study after study, congressional query after congressional query, forums, think pieces, blogs, you name it. They're continuing to rehash the same challenges and questions that we've been asking for 30 years. What is OSINT? Who should do it? Should it be part of an all-source intelligence analytic product or collection strategy? Why do we need specialization? And of course, the perennial question in government bureaucracies, where should it be done? Mature disciplines, whether in the IC or in medicine, architecture, or the arts, have an established vocabulary. They have career paths. They have foundational building blocks. Humans, SIGINT, GeoInt have these career paths. They have the terms and structure, but to date, this does not exist in the OSINT community across the IC. Even the pronunciation of the discipline is inconsistent. In mature disciplines, we would never hear it referred to as HUMANT or SIGINT, or outside of the IC, architecture, but we hear OSINT, OSINT, OSINT. A colleague of mine likes to quip that OSINT is counting the number of flying monkeys on the yellow brick road. But these are examples of the immaturity of open source. I do want to take a moment and define what I mean when I talk about open source intelligence, because as you know, we've seen the term used to describe any number of types of information gathered from unclassified sources, everything from newspapers to the internet, and used for intelligence or law enforcement, or even for commercial due diligence. Many companies sell open source products and tools to rapidly search, translate, display, assemble data from vast amounts. Exabytes, I think, is the term now used to process these vast amounts of information. Many commercial organizations do what they call OSINT training, and then they self-certify the people who take that training as OSINT professionals. So there's a lot of confusion about what it is and what it isn't, how it's used, and who should do it. There is actually a legal definition of OSINT as it applies to the intelligence community. It's Public Law 109-163, Section 931, and this was part of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2006. And it says, I'm going to read it, open source intelligence, OSINT, is intelligence that is produced from publicly available information and is collected, exploited, and disseminated in a timely manner to an appropriate audience for the purpose of addressing a specific intelligence requirement. So the important emphasis here is that open source intelligence, OSINT, to be that, the activity has to be done to meet an intelligence question or requirement. Law enforcement use of publicly available information for a law enforcement purpose isn't OSINT from an IC perspective, nor is a commercial entity using publicly available information for commercial purposes. A better and more correct term for what they do would be publicly available research, PAI research. It's perfectly legitimate. It's a very important use of open source information, but as we define it in the intelligence community, it's not OSINT. So I mentioned that we date OSINT from 1941 with FBMS and then FIBIS. And we don't really have time to go into the ups and downs of OSINT from World War II to the present. But it's notable that the military services and the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, began to talk more about the value of OSINT in the late 1980s, and particular in the 1990s. The Army especially has been out in front with centers of excellence, such as the Asian Studies Detachment at Kabzam in Japan, the 66th Military Intelligence Brigade in Wiesbaden, Germany, and the Foreign Military Studies Office, FIMSO, at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The Marine Corps also, with its expeditionary mission, has invested heavily in OSINT. And the rest of the IC has OSINT organizations or offices with varying degrees of focus and various levels of maturity. All 18 members of the intelligence community have some sort of OSINT capability. The largest, of course, was the Open Source Center at the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. That was established in 2005. It's now renamed the Open Source Enterprise and serves as the IC's OSINT functional manager. Its director leads the National Open Source Committee. And we can talk during the Q&A about its role and how it works with the Department of Defense, as well as the domestic agencies in the IC. But it's disconcerting as we look over the last 40 years of open source in the IC to note that the issues and discussions that have been discussed all these years remain identical. The community and Congress continue to ask where and by whom OSINT should be done, where the product should be stored, and what training is needed. One can actually go back to testimony before the House Homeland Security Committee in 2005. And if you didn't know the date of the transcript, you would swear it was done last week. Questions are exactly the same. So with the increase in use of open source and the confusion across the various communities that use it, last year, a long-term colleague and I decided it was time to start an organization that focused on supporting the intelligence community's open source practitioners. And as I've noted, agencies have their own OSINT organization and practices based on their own missions and their own authorities, and so they should. Some have very robust programs. Others have their all-source intelligence analysts do OSINT as an additional duty. There aren't clearly defined career paths for OSINT practitioners in most of the smaller agencies, and there are not always common standards for OSINT practice or products. So we believe in the OSINT Foundation that there are fundamental building blocks for OSINT, sort of your 101 course level of things that should be commonly accepted and acknowledged across the entire community. So we established the OSINT Foundation last year. It's almost a year old, and it is a nonprofit professional association to promote OSINT tradecraft, elevate the discipline, and develop the practitioner community to advance the national security of the U.S. It's analogous in a way to the American Bar Association or the American Medical Association. They were established to support their own practitioners. So we want to focus on the practitioners who do OSINT analysis and collection in the IC. As we grow, we're providing forums, continuing education, networking opportunities, best practices, and ultimately, we hope certification by promulgating the IC agency standard and practices, and by recognizing performance excellence like we did for NGA Terraline. We want to support the IC in recommending appropriate strategies and policies for OSINT across the community OSINT enterprise. We don't want to tell the government what to do, but we want to come alongside the government and help get these ideas across the entire community. And we've been really pleased with the strong support that we've received from practitioners. So clearly this kind of focus is needed. Just a word, I think, on challenges in OSINT, and then I'll stop. In the IC, the use of open source presents a lot of challenges, especially protecting the privacy of American citizens, protecting civil rights and civil liberties, and also the dangers of mis and disinformation. Even operational security is a critical issue when you're talking about OSINT in the IC. And so these are topics that, again, you could spend an entire day talking about. There are a number of articles online. I commend them to you. Think pieces by a number of organizations about those. But I will say that I believe if we mature OSINT through professionalizing the workforce and training the workforce and establishing common tradecraft standards for OSINT use and products, will go a long way for increasing transparency and mitigating some of this potential misuse. As I said, every decade or so, we face the same questions about OSINT. And as far back as the 1980s, the question was raised as to whether the IC's OSINT Center of Excellence should be the open source center, which is part of the CIA, or done at each agency. The Army's Intelligence 21 study in 1998 asked the same question. And in 2005, Congress asked the new Director of National Intelligence, Ambassador Negroponte, that time, for a study of whether there should be a single agency for OSINT like NSA is for signals intelligence. In the Intelligence Authorization Act of 21, the question was asked again. The DNI was asked to conduct a risk and benefit analysis for creating an independent open source center. And there are still studies going on. That hasn't been decided yet. So I hope I've given you a bit of explanation as to why we in the OSINT Foundation think that OSINT, as a vital component of intelligence capabilities, needs to mature as a full-fledged discipline more than ever now. And we need practitioners who can effectively work to provide OSINT to answer the critical intelligence questions of our policymakers and our military.
Barbara, thank you very much for that. And I'm going to ask our listeners to please post questions in the Q&A. We have a lot of chat going on, which is fantastic, but I may not be able to spot the question in the chat. I will spot it in the Q&A. So if you could put it there, that would be great. Let me ask a couple, and then we'll get to our audience questions. And let's, rolling back this has been a controversy, as you say, or controversy, if that's the right word. At least there's a lot of questions from Congress. How do we exploit this? How do we use it? We've come a long way. There's a lot more technology involved. There's a lot more ability to sort through this information. In your long career, how have you seen the evolution of how we've been using OSINT, say at DIA and then later at DHS?
Yeah, well, like I said, when I was an analyst, when I began my career, I got a pouch about once a month with newspapers from my area of responsibility, and I would go through and read them. We also got Phoebus hard copy products. They came from with a different color cover, depending upon what part of the world you were looking at. I think Middle East was brown. I was a West Europe specialist, and it was orange. And you could tell from the mail sorting, who was going to get those Phoebus products. And they were gistings of journals and articles and translations, because not every analyst was fluent in the language they followed. Moving, ahead, we started seeing more online. And again, it seemed to be, for many, many years, contextual, providing some local color. When I took over the collection discipline at DHS, so I had sort of a 10-year break between being an analyst and going to DHS. I was doing management and programming and budgeting and policy questions and things like that. I discovered that now the OSINT practitioners were looking at videos. For example, at DHS, Al-Qaeda was publishing the journal every month or quarter, and they would go through, they'd translate it, they would write OSINT intelligence reports, like our human intelligence reports, and then that was incorporated into the product. So it's grown. The question still remains, how do you get it so it can be used mostly? Where is it stored? So if we're going to access open source on an unclassified level, which provides great benefits in the operational community or in coalition fighting, working with our foreign partners, how is it incorporated into an all-source product that might be on the classified side? So those are some of the challenges, I think, that have existed as it's grown. And now, of course, we've got the question of the internet. And as I said, operational security can become an issue if you're accessing the deep web or chat forums and things like that.
One of the great products that the Open Source Center used to put out, maybe still does, is the media guides. And if you were particularly working on a specific country, you could get a guide to all the main media outlets in the country, what their political slant was, who owned them, things like this that really give a lot of context to the analyst. Do you see something like that as perhaps what a good function of say a separate agency would be in terms of vetting open source, like the Open Source Center used to do for the media guides?
Good question. I think that open source practitioners need to be trained into how to vet activities. We used to say, is news of the world as vital a source as the London Times or the New York Times or whatever? And the people who are training OSINT practitioners go through a checklist of how to determine the veracity and the bias of all of the activities. Certainly, whether it's done in a center or whether it's done by each agency, that you're right, that's an activity that needs to be done, and very hard now because we have access to global products and broadcast and blogs, and trying to assess that is important. The whole notion of artificial intelligence and photoshopping and what we can do digitally creates a whole nother question of how to verify and vet those activities. I'm not practicing. I'm not an OSINT practitioner at this point, so I know that our young ones coming on need to have that kind of information. It needs to be done somewhere.
You talk for a moment about what we talk about OSINT in sort of a gray area, sort of gray materials, or if that's the right word, phrase to use, things that are maybe proprietary, sort of off the that are maybe require certain limited subscriptions, things like that, which could be a great source for of intelligence, but it just simply are just not that publicly available.
So gray literature has always been viewed as one of the elements of open source. Our practitioner committee has come out with a list of definitions of the mediums of open source, which is broadcast and digital and print, which would include gray literature. Gray literature has traditionally been materials that are available in a conference area, for example. It's publicly available. And it's just not readily available to, Joe Citizen, but it's not hidden by any stretch of the imagination. You talked about commercial. I think you talked about commercial as well.
Mhm.
And that is information that is available to the general public, either sold or leased, but it's used for non-governmental purposes. It becomes proprietary if it's not available to the public, and that is an area that we run into some questions just recently raised about the government's use of proprietary information or commercially available information that's not publicly available. It's sold to the government, and is that a violation of personal privacy activities? And that's still a challenge that is being addressed by the DNI. Congress is very interested in that, and so forth.
So one of the, I think, challenges for OSINT, and you alluded to this at the beginning, was its lack of stature among the other ints. But that's not just among the intelligence community. That's also with the customers, right? With the policymakers. Do they see OSINT as being on the same level when they're getting an intelligence product, right? Or are they seeing this as somehow being not quite the good stuff?
Not the sexy stuff, anyway.
Right.
I think the military operators are increasingly demanding open source because it's faster. It provides more situational awareness and can respond in a much quicker way than information that is on the high side, the classified side. So I would not want to speak for a policymaker or agencies across the IC at a level of, well, we're discounting OSINT. I think there's an awareness that it has value. The question becomes, how should we train the people who are doing OSINT, and should it be like a separate career activity? In many organizations, the perspective seems to be, well, you're the China military political analyst, so you can do your own open source. Maybe you speak the language, so go read the newspapers and do your thing. What we need to make sure that people understand is that it's much more than just doing a Google search. Just because we all hold cell phones in our hands doesn't mean we're all SIGINT analysts, right? Because there's tradecraft, there's specific techniques that have to be used if you're doing SIGINT. Well, that's the same case if you're doing open source, particularly when it comes to accessing information that is maybe publicly available, but may not be indexed, for example, looking at the large data sets that we have. And of course, you get into, machine translation, which is for a while, at least when I was still in government, was still being touted as, well, this is a way to, get more information out with fewer people. Yet we know that it's a good tool, but it's not the be all end all. You lose the nuance, you lose the context of language, of dialects, if you rely on machines to do all of that. Anybody who's gone to another country and relied on Google Translate knows that it's great to help, but it's not always exactly accurate. So there's a growing awareness. I think Congress is very interested in OSINT and trying to figure out how to help the government, professionalize and institutionalize this as a full-fledged int.
One of the problems may be that it sort of bleeds over into the other ends, doesn't it? I mean, there's a lot of things where you see, oh, well, is that OSINT or is that SIGINT? Or is that GeoInt?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, each traditional intelligence discipline uses unclassified and publicly available information. I mean, GeoInt using commercially available imagery, it's still GeoInt, it's OSINT enabled GeoInt. But the rest of the sort of an OSINT specific product or activity of gathering that information needs to be viewed as its own discipline with its own tradecraft and practices and procedures and policies. We haven't even talked about things like policies for auditing the use of OSINT tools, for example. We want to be sure that somebody is not using powerful tools to spy on his neighbor because he can. And these are some of the areas where recognizing this as a discipline with foundational building blocks would be very useful.
Right. Well, it's certainly important now, especially for analysts, to understand what the legal boundaries are as we're becoming more capable of exploiting this information, should we, right? In many cases. Okay. I'm going to we have a lot of questions. I'd like to start getting to them now. Thanks everybody for your attention. Let's start. To what extent does OSINT Foundation support OSINT professionals outside the U.S. government?
So because we're just starting and right now it's a volunteer leadership and activity, we have one part-time staff person. We are focusing only on the IC, and that's a question of bandwidth. There's a lot of open source intelligence practice and tools that are used outside the government, outside the IC. And that's great, but we just don't have the bandwidth to do that. Our products are posted on our website, and we try to be as transparent as possible so that other people can use them. For example, our definitions document can be used and reused with proper attribution and so forth. We encourage that. We have fielded questions from our Five Eyes partners who would like to be part of this. And again, right now, we can't do it because there are export control issues going outside the U.S. intelligence aid community. As we grow, we would, be able to reconsider this in the future. But right now, we're just 11 months old and haven't quite grown to the place where we can do that.
Next question. Is there a resource list of online articles on OSINT that could be made available to our participants? Well, I don't have a list, Carl. However, there's been fantastic articles written in the academic press on OSINT. I should mention that you'll find there's an article by the RAND Corporation did a study in the last few years on OSINT and DoD, and you can find that just by Googling it, which is a really good introduction to all the issues surrounding OSINT. I wish I had the title off the top of my head, but I don't. But yeah, you'll be able to find it. Like as Barbara alluded to, this has been an old issue for the intelligence community, and you will find writing that goes on about this for over the several decades, really. So happy hunting on the OSINT articles, but yeah, they're definitely out there. Let me get to the next question. You find the evolving challenges presented by artificial intelligence, chatbots such as ChatGPT and other similar platforms will present formidable obstacles in future OSINT endeavors.
Was that a question or a comment?
Both.
Yeah. So AI is a tool like other tools, and as it evolves, I think the question of vetting and being sure that we are not getting misinformation or disinformation from some of those. Photography has developed so that you can Photoshop, your person in, your person out, that sort of thing. And so we've got some experience in the past few years with digital photography, and have seen how it can be manipulated. And so I agree that some of this AI could evolve into that. I've been playing with Chat GPT myself a little bit, trying to see, what it does and what it doesn't do. And I asked it the other day about the protests in France. And it came back and it said, well, my information only goes through 2021. So I don't have any, current information like that. So as these various AI activities grow, we have to be sure that we're looking at the sources of the information that's being used. But I do think with careful awareness of where the material is coming from, it can be a good tool. In commercial imagery, the geolocation of the image and that sort of thing is helpful. For example, as one way to vet the source of the image. They were doing that in Ukraine. Terraline is really great, and if the audience isn't aware of it, you should go to NGA or terraline.mil. I think that's the website, but just Google NGA Terraline, and you can see the kinds of information that they are putting out using publicly available information, and it's really very valuable. It's growing in its use, and I think it's the academic programs and other programs that are partnering with NGA are doing a great job.
Great. I'm gonna. You alluded to this question as well, but it was from one of our foreign students who asks, what is the legal framework for collecting and analyzing social media posts in the U.S.? What kind of a legal approval is that? Do we need for that? And of course, this is a big sticking point.
Yeah. Well, so the intelligence community is governed by Executive Order 12333, and it's been amended several times. Also governed by the guidelines put out by the Attorney General. Any collection has to be consistent with the mission of that organization. It also has to use the least intrusive mechanism to gain the information. So those would be the main, legal strictures for intelligence collection. Some people think that an intelligence officer can go into social media, into websites and so forth, and pretend to be someone they're not, and that this is open source. We're just getting information because it's on social media. Actually, if you're doing that, that no longer is an OSINT activity. That's a human activity. That's solicitation, and that is extremely controlled. I'm not a humenter, so I'm not going to speak to that. But those are some of the differences that we have to be careful of. And as I said, we want to be sure that we're not using an open IP address that lets adversaries know that we're looking at information on one of their websites. So all of these are activities that have to be discussed and taught in the training of OSINT professionals to avoid those sorts of things. It's not just going in and seeing who posted what on Facebook, for example.
Right. If you're one question is, if you're a self-taught practitioner, what do you see as the career path? What is there certifications one could get that would make you marketable in the community?
Oh, I'm so glad somebody asked that question. First of all, if you're an undergrad, and I know this is mostly a graduate program, well, if you're a student, join the OSINT Foundation. We're cheap. We just offered scholarships for undergraduates, which was why I had the BAs on my brain. There are no standard certifications right now, and that's one of the things that we're hoping as a foundation that we can start offering. You may be familiar with the Project Management Institute, PMI. It's used a lot in industry for program managers, project managers, and the government now on contracts will say, we want companies to come in and perform this for us, build us a data center or do analysis or whatever. And whoever's leading this needs to be PMI certified. Get your project management professional, your PMP. PMI has been around a long time. I'm not sure exactly how long, but they don't train project management professionals, but they establish standards. And then lots of organizations do a boot camp, a week-long boot camp that teach the particular areas where the PMP is going to be tested. And our vision is that ultimately we will know what the government wants as OSINT standards and OSINT skills, again, at the foundational level. And then we could get to a certification that everybody would be able to use. Now, when you go from CIA to DIA to DEA to FBI's National Security Branch, those organizations are going to have their own processes, their own tools. That's inherently governmental. And so that's where we view this as sort of, the 301 level, the 401 level, so that people coming in with a basic understanding of OSINT techniques then can go anywhere in the IC and get trained up on those specific activities for those organizations that the government would put forward. Right now, to answer your questioners, that doesn't exist. There aren't certifications per se, and it's one of the big gaps, and it's one of the gaps that has been noticed across all of these decades of questions. We need to professionalize the workforce in that way.
And that leads into another question that we have, and just on this, undergraduates who are want to pursue careers in IC, what are some important things we can consider in training this generation in OSINT?
Well, OSINT as part of all of the disciplines, and OSINT as it fits into intelligence analysis. There are differing views as to whether OSINT is a collection discipline or whether it's an analytic discipline. My own personal position is that it can be either one. So training incoming young professionals in the intelligence community, they should be trained in critical thinking for analysis, analytic techniques, and structured analytic techniques that talk about identifying biases and noting how to lay out, judgments and that sort of thing. Those are useful whether you're doing OSINT or whether you're doing all source analysis or any other kind of analysis, frankly, because that's putting your thoughts into a structured format. Specifically for someone who's interested in OSINT, the cyber community certainly is using that more and more. So some OSINTers are taking sort of a path in cybersecurity and learning that. OSINT is going to require large data scientists, and so an understanding of data science and how that's used in going through all of these large data sets is really important. And of course, I tell students all the time that foreign language competency is critical, because as you are looking at open source information, again, understanding the cultural context and the nuance of the language is much better than relying on machine translations. So I would just note those as sort of activities that they could be working on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, frankly, a lot of this just started out as research, right? I mean, this is just research, and we how the going back to the days of research and analysis division of OSS, just looking at open source and gleaning as much as we can from it. Having students learn good research techniques from librarians
Yes.
is another great place to start. Library science, I see, is probably a great area to get into if you're probably getting smart in OSINT. Let me get back to something we touched on earlier, a question about an independent OSINT agency. You didn't take a stand on this, Barbara. Probably that was judicious, but what are the pros and cons that we see with that?
Yeah, the foundation itself hasn't taken a position, and we like to do that with our members. So I will just say, from watching NGA take root back when I was in government, you see the difficulty of establishing a new organization. One of the benefit of an agency could be the sense of having an advocate, providing a focal point for OSINT, establishing policies that would address issues of what would be the repository and formats for storing the information, and having sort of the gravitas of a discipline. One an OSINT agency or center of gravity as something akin to the National Reconnaissance Office, which is the organization that does the acquisition of satellites. That it doesn't do the imagery or SIGINT analysis. That's done by other agencies, but it's the place where those things are acquired. People have tools in each agency, sometimes duplicative tools. Industry can sell the same tool to multiple government agencies, and get twice or three times the money for it. So perhaps a central agency could be used as the location for acquiring those tools and data sets. So that's one kind of thought. Some of the cons for it, and some of the things that have been problematic for the Open Source Center. First of all, it was a CIA entity. So when I went to DHS, they're like, yeah, we can't really do, stuff for the domestics because that's against CIA's charter. So that becomes a problem. The IC now covers the waterfront of missions and authorities. What do the military operators need, and what does the president need, and what do the domestic agencies need? DEA, DHS. So that becomes more difficult when you have a centralized place. So a federated organization with common standards could be, the way to go. Of course, the setting up a new agency requires human resources and funding and all sorts of infrastructure that becomes very expensive. Back when I was in the government, we talked about setting up an extra agency in DHS. It's actually now is CISA, but back in the mid 2000s, it was like $60 million for the first year was the estimate. I don't know what CISA ultimately had to do to become a separate agency, but those are some of the cons I think that become difficult.
OSINT used in counterintelligence. How relatable is that? Do we see that as a big function for CI?
Yes, I think so. Again, that the tradecraft of the CI folks needs to bring in OSINT as applied to their particular activities. And I am not knowledgeable so much of the CI space, so I wouldn't want to go into a lot of specifics about that. But it clearly can be used to protect our assets, our intelligence assets, and they work closely with humans, so they should be working closely with OSINT as well.
Question on OSINT as in its use in intelligence products like finished intelligence. Is there a process followed? Is integration happen organically? I think that I was reading just before we started the program that, back in the day, Joseph Nye said, OSINT is kind of like the outer rim of the jigsaw puzzle, right? All those pieces that you put together to give you a framework. And then later, of course, it's become much more integrated woven in to the whole analytic picture. And maybe that's my answer to that, Sheila, is when as an analyst, I'm sure Barbara feels the same way, that it's a lot, you're relying a lot more on OSINT than you may even realize, putting together an analytic product.
Some of our members in our member portal are talking about the difficulty, and again, it gets to sort of where is it stored. If it's done on the low side and it remains on the low side, then it's not going to easily get incorporated into a classified finished product. But if it's immediately moved up there and we don't have a mere portal or repository on the low side so that it can be sent to other consumers or coalition partners or whatever, now it only becomes the color commentary for what you do. So figuring out ways to move it from high to low is really important.
We have lots of questions. Elizabeth, question on skill building books for OSINT. By the way, shout out to Elliot for his article, and Elliot, your colleague Elliot Jardine's article in the 5 disciplines of intelligence. That was Bob Clark and Mark Lowenthal book, and he has an article on OSINT in there, very worthwhile reading. There's a book by, I think it's Michael Bazel, B-A-Z-E-L-L, very, very detailed on open source collection. And I should add something to that. Briefly, when I was in the private world, we did a lot of due diligence work, all open source exploitation for due diligence reports, and there's lots of good books on that. Anything to add there, Barbara, on that question?
No, I use Elliot's article a lot.
Yeah, right, me too.
It's great, and it's still one of the most definitive areas of going through the history and the vetting and that sort of thing. He'd sit down long enough to write a whole book on OSINT and get that done. There's just it's hard to keep up with it. I would say, and I didn't talk to this, a lot of people sort of think if we just have the right tools, you can teach people the buttonology, and then they'll miraculously use publicly available information in an intelligence product. But we're still back to the whole critical thinking and research plans, just like you would do in school to get your paper out. We need to do that and train our analysts to use those same tools and techniques as they write something for a national security customer.
We're getting closing in here on the end of the program, but I'll try to get a few more questions in. From one of our faculty members asked about there's so much data, there's so much they cross into the territory of traditional INTs, commercial SAR imagery, social media ground imagery, radio transmitter, geolocation services. Where do we draw the line between OSINT and open aspects of other INTs, or it doesn't even matter?
Well, I commented that all of the INTs use OSINT in one way or another, and so we tend to call that, OSINT enabled OSINT enabled SIGINT, and I would view that as what an analyst would do. You take that information and apply it. OSINT is also used very significantly in tipping and queuing of those other disciplines, finding something in an open, a publicly available piece, and then passing that on to the other disciplines where our national technical means or our human capabilities can be applied to get the answer. So I don't know that you draw a line per se, but you certainly work together in consonance to get the answer to the question.
We're coming up in the hour now. Barbara, last words on where do you see this 10 years from now? Are we going to still be talking about the same thing?
No, I hope not. I think that we may be at a point where you've got enough people recognizing the value. The millennials and Gen Xers grew up with information that is passed at the speed of light. Some of us old folks, are having a little harder time getting used to it. So I would like to be the optimist and say that we're now at a point where something can be done. But as long as folks are arguing over geography, then you have less ability to actually solve the problem. So hopefully we'll get tradecraft and people and processes and techniques all in place and do open source more effectively.
And by the way, just folks, do check out the OSINT Foundation's website and think about joining the foundation. There's information there if you want to learn more. And also OSINT. Please don't say OSINT. Please. And I'd like to thank Barbara for being with us today. This is a super knowledgeable, very highly detailed. Obviously, I think we're all thirsty to learn even more about it. I hope some of the sources we talked about help. Good luck in your work, Barbara. Thank you also for your years of government service and what you did for us. We hope to have you back soon.
Thank you. It's been delightful.
And let me mention too that next month on August 16th, Inside Intelligence will host legendary spy master Jack Devine talking about spying and covert action made simple. And he'll probably be talking about a lot more besides that. So please join us next month, August 16th. Same time and date, same Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard as usual. And that's it for me. I want to thank again our guests, Barbara Alexander and Peter Huggins, for putting this event together. We'll see you next time.